Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. I hope you're all well wherever you are and whatever you're up to. I'm Lauren, and in this video I'm going to be chatting to you about using PDF sewing patterns. So if you are someone who has never used a PDF sewing pattern before, or you feel a bit skeptical about them, or you've used one before but you've just not got on well with it, then I know that this video is going to give you lots of hints and tips and hopefully just help you to understand about them a bit better and how to get the most use out of them really. So I'm going to put a link to the corresponding blog post that goes with this video in the description of the video. And in that blog post, I'll just sort of summarise all of the things that I talk about in this video, and then some of the tools and equipment that I mention and that I'm going to talk about in the video are also going to be linked in the blog post, as well as links to the PDF pattern printing service that we have here at Guthrie and Ganny, and I'm going to explain to you how to use that as well. So check out the blog post for all of those links. So yeah, in this video I'm just going to be giving you an overview of PDF sewing patterns from the very beginning. So I'm just going to be covering the basics. What are they, where to find them, what to do with them, how to print them, whether that's printing them at home or whether that's getting them printed elsewhere on a large scale printer. And then I'm also going to chat to you about how you can use them to then get to the stage where you're actually cutting out your fabric or working on your project. And then I'm also going to cover how to store them as well, and some ideas just to give you some inspiration for how you might sort of organise them and kind of file them and store them, just so you get the most use out of them really. So first of all, just to cover the basics, what actually are PDF sewing patterns? And really they are just electronic files in a PDF format of a sewing pattern. So when you buy a traditional printed sewing pattern like the ones that are on the wall behind me here in the shop, these are all from independent sewing pattern companies. The PDF sewing pattern is just the electronic version of the printed sewing pattern. So over the past decade or so, the PDF patterns have become so much more popular, and now I would say pretty much all of the independent sewing pattern companies are producing or making available PDF sewing patterns alongside their printed sewing pattern version. So usually when they release a sewing pattern, then you can either choose to buy the traditional printed version or you can choose to buy a PDF version. Some sewing pattern companies only sell PDFs, so you just can't get the printed format available at all. It doesn't exist. They're only available as PDF. Some sewing pattern companies might have a little bit of both. So they might have the printed sewing pattern, the traditional printed sewing pattern in one size range, but in PDF format they might have two size ranges available. So it just sort of depends, it kind of varies really, depending on what company you're looking at. So some of you might be thinking, well, what are the advantages of getting a PDF sewing pattern over the traditional printed sewing pattern? And I would say for me, the biggest advantage really is that the choice is so much greater, because there are just so many more different sewing patterns available only in a PDF format. So really it's about choice and variety for me. That is like the top advantage. Another big advantage is that you can get started on your project right away, because PDF sewing patterns come with a version that you can print at home on a regular printer. Obviously you have to have the regular printer, but if you've got one, then you can get started in your projects right away, because when you purchase the PDF files from the internet, you can then download them right away, so you can get started right away on your project. The next advantage is once you purchase that PDF pattern and you own your own copy of the file, you can print it as many times as you want. So you can print it and then you might lose it, or you might want to make a different size, or you might misplace one of the key pieces like the front bodice, and then you can just print another version again. You can print as many copies as you like because you own that PDF file. So it just gives you, I guess, more flexibility and a bit of backup should anything happen to you, the pattern that you're working on. A lot of people find the PDF sewing patterns useful, especially for children's wear, because obviously with kids wear, the chances are you're going to be making various different sizes as the baby or the child grows up, so it just gives more longevity out of the sewing pattern if you've got the PDF version, because otherwise if you've just got the traditional paper format, you're going to have to trace off every size that you need, whereas with the PDF you can just print it off, choose a size, print it off again, choose your next size, and then you just get more use out of it really. Now, in terms of the cost of a PDF sewing pattern, they do vary, and some companies can charge a similar amount to a printed sewing pattern. Some might be a bit cheaper for the PDFs. It just depends really what company you're looking at. So quite often, by the time that you've added up the price of the PDF pattern, and then say you send the file off somewhere to get it printed on a large scale printer, that initial sort of cost can sometimes end up actually being more expensive than just buying one copy of the traditional sewing pattern. But because you own those files and you can always go back to them again in the future, if you are someone who thinks that you might make a different size in the future, or you just want to know that you've kind of got that backup there should anything happen to the actual physical copy of the pattern, then the PDFs then do become more value for money. Because if you'd bought a traditional printed sewing pattern and then you lost it or something happened to it and you needed another one and you had to buy a whole new printed sewing pattern again, then that is going to be more expensive than just having the PDF file and paying to get it printed as and when you need it. So you might be thinking, where can I actually buy these PDF sewing patterns from? And it is an excellent question. And the most common place to get them from is directly from the sewing pattern company's website themselves. And there are loads and loads and loads, too many to list here. I think that would be a separate video and a separate blog really to list all the independent sewing pattern companies that do PDFs. There probably are some blog posts and guides out there that kind of list them all. But once you find the website, usually you can filter a search and just look at PDF sewing patterns, and you might find that you see some patterns there that you haven't come across before. So Closet Core Patterns, for example, we stock a wide range of their traditional printed sewing patterns in the shop, but when you go onto their website and you look at the PDF patterns, you'll see that they also have some patterns that are only available as PDF. Quite often the independent companies who are sort of releasing more patterns as time goes on, and instead of sort of just discontinuing their kind of back catalogue completely and it not being available at all anymore, they might discontinue the printed version of the pattern but maintain the PDF copy on their website. So if you come across a pattern that was released quite a long time ago, for example, and you want to try and still use that pattern or buy it from somewhere, usually you can still get the PDF version if the printed pattern isn't available anymore. You can also get PDF sewing patterns from like third-party websites as well. So Etsy, for example, they have quite a lot of PDF sewing patterns available on there. And then some sewing pattern companies will also sort of collaborate with other businesses like mine, for example, and then you can buy PDF patterns through their website too. So we have partnered up with 3 independent sewing pattern companies: Friday Pattern Company, Named Clothing, and Jennifer Lauren Handmade, and we sell their PDF patterns through our website. So the advantage to that is that on our website you can order the PDF pattern and the files get emailed to you when you complete the order, and you can also select to have the PDF pattern printed out at the same time. And then of course you can add your fabric and your notions and everything all together. So all in one transaction just on our website, basically you can get everything all together rather than going to one place for the PDF and then another place to get it printed and then another place to get all the fabric. You can just kind of do it all in one, which is great. So on the website we've got a little filter section at the side where you can view the PDF patterns that we have, and then you can just see the selection of all the different ones that are available through the Guthrie and Ganny website. So now we'll get a little bit more technical and I'm going to explain to you how the PDF files actually work. So when you complete your purchase online on the website that you're buying the PDF files from, once your order's completed, then typically there will be a link that then sort of pops up on the screen where you can download the files onto your device or your computer, whatever you're using. And then you're very typically also emailed a copy of that link as well to the email address that you used for the purchase. And then in that email will also be a link to download the files too. So I would always recommend that as soon as you kind of get that link to download them, that you download them and you save them in a safe place. So the way that I organise my PDF files on my computer. So I have a specific folder in my documents that's called PDF sewing patterns, and then within that you can then organise the files by whatever sort of filing system that you want to do. So it might be that you then have a folder for dresses, trousers, tops, whatever, or it might be that you file them by pattern company, for example. So I would suggest kind of organising them in a way that makes sense to you, that you prefer, and then it just means whenever you go to try and find those files in the future, it's just really easy to sort of filter through and find them. You're not having to kind of rake through your emails and think, oh, where is that link again? I'm sure I've had it somewhere. If you just download the files, save them in a safe place, then they're always going to be easy to find in the future. So the files that you actually get, there'll be several that actually get downloaded when you purchase one pattern. So you usually have one file that is going to be the instruction booklet. Then you'll have another file that is going to be the version that you would use to print it at home. Now, depending on the company that you're purchasing from, sometimes they will have an A4 version and they might have a separate US letter version as well, because those paper sizes are slightly different. So there might be one or both of them. Then there'll also be an A0 version of the file as well, which is like the wide kind of format, the big version, big like life-size version of the pattern as well. And that's the one that you would use to send off to get it printed on like a large format printer. So if you decide that you're going to print the pattern yourself at home, then you're going to be printing it on like your regular printer that you have, whether that's an A4 one if you're in the UK or a US letter one if you're elsewhere. I'm not sure if other countries maybe use that format too. And then when you print it, it's really, really important, and the instructions that come with the pattern will always say this anyway, you have to print it at the right scale. Okay, you have to print it at 100% scale so that it prints out at the right size and it's kind of calibrated properly. And once you've printed it out, then you need to check that there's usually like a little box that tells you how big it should be, and then you just need to measure that and check that it's, you know, the measurements match. So if it says the box should be 10 centimetres, measure it, make sure it actually is 10 centimetres, and then you're going to know that it's printed out at the right scale and that the size you choose is going to come out the way that is sort of intended. So you're then basically faced with a bit of a jigsaw puzzle to do, because this pattern is going to print out on these single sheets of paper that then have to be stuck together to make the full-sized version of the pattern. Now, there are lots of different ways that you can stick them together. I'm going to explain to you the way that works for me. I've tried various ways in the past. People kind of find their own preference of how to do this, but I'll show you the way that I like to do it. So I've just got in this habit of cutting off the border of the piece of paper along the bottom and the right hand side. So you'll usually find that the lines on the pattern don't go like right to the edge of the paper. They're usually kind of contained within a box on the paper. So I always cut the border off only on the bottom and on the right hand side, and I'll just kind of sit in front of the TV and I'll just cut along the bottom and cut along the side just till I've done all of the sheets that are in the pattern that I'm going to be sticking together. Then quite often the instructions that kind of come as part of the PDF files will tell you the layout of like the order that the pages have to be in. Now, some companies do this in different ways than others. So the example that I'm showing you here is for the Sew House 7 toaster sweater, and you can see that they number the pages, which make it quite easy to sort of work out where they're going. They also have a little star on the edge of the border of the paper too that sort of helps you to know how things kind of stick together. And I would say, in my experience, some companies sort of make this easier than others, but the principle is always going to be the same. Yeah, I think it's easier to trim part of the paper down, and then it's easier when you come to sort of overlap them, that you can kind of get the lines to all match up basically. So what I'll do is, once I've got it all trimmed and I kind of know the layout of the order that I'm going to stick things together in, is that I'll do it by rows. So I'll stick together one row, so it's like one long thin kind of row of paper, and then once I've done that, I'll then stick together the next row, and then I'll stick those two rows together on top of each other. And I like to use a glue stick to do that, so it's just really easy. You just run the glue stick down one side of the paper, overlap them, make sure that the lines match up as best you can, and then yeah, just continue that for the row same again for the next row, and then join them together. And I've kind of found that the sort of easiest way to do it. Now, I know that a lot of people kind of get worried about how precisely all of the lines kind of match up and add up. One thing that I would say is that when you're trimming the paper down, kind of like slight variations in exactly where you trim it. I mean, if things are out by like a millimetre or something, I honestly wouldn't worry about it too much. You know, if you're getting like a big step in the lines and they're like this, then that's maybe a bit of an issue. But you know, if it's kind of like this as opposed to like matching up really accurately, it's honestly not really going to make too much of a difference, especially if you're making something loose fitted as well. Now, if that kind of thing is going to bug you when lines don't line up perfectly and accurately, or you're making something that's like really sculpted and tight fitted, then it might be that this format of printing out the PDF pattern is just not for you. And in that case, I would recommend getting it sent off somewhere to get printed for you on a large scale printer, so you don't have to mess about with sticking things together. So as you can see, it does take a bit of time to do the A4 method, but the advantage is that if it's a Sunday and you're just desperate to like get stuck into that project and you can't wait to get it printed somewhere else, and you do have a printer at home, then you can get started on your project a bit quicker. So it just depends what is going to work for you, really. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about sending the files off to get them printed on a large scale printer. And we offer that service here at Guthrie & Ganney. We can print your patterns for you on large A0 paper. So earlier on in 2020, we decided to invest in a large scale printer because it was going to help with the production of our monthly Sewing Society dressmaking kits that we sell. It would mean that we could increase the number of kits that we sell. And then it also made sense to offer the service to our customers that they could send us their PDF pattern files and we could print them for them, and then it meant that you could get your files printed and you could order your fabric and your notions and everything you needed to make the project at the same time. So the way that it works is that we have a product listed on our website that is for the PDF pattern printing service. And what you have to do is select the number of pages that are in your PDF file. So depending on what the garment is, there might be one page if it's just a simple top, or if it's a dress or something more complicated, or it's a pattern that's got lots of pieces, then it might have more than one A0 page. So it might have 2 or 3 or 4 even, just depends on the garment really. And you'll be able to see that when you open up that PDF file of the A0 version on your device or computer. You'll be able to see how many pages are in it. So you just have to select that number of pages from the products page on our website and add that to your basket. And then what is going to happen is as you proceed through the checkout on the website, it will prompt you to upload your files. So there's just a little button that you have to click on, and then you'll be able to select the file from where you've saved it on your device or your computer, upload it onto the website so that you can then complete the transaction. Now our website does only let you add one file per sort of item of pattern printing that you've ordered. So there are some pattern companies that say the A0 PDF version of the pattern is 2 pages long. They might give you 2 separate A0 files rather than combining it into like the 2 pages into one file. So there's a few options if that's the case. If you've got one pattern that has got 2 separate PDF A0 files that are of the same pattern, you can upload one of them and then you can just email us the other one, and then we'll have both of them to print for you. Or if you're a bit more computer savvy and you know how to zip the 2 files together into one file, then you can do that as well, and then you can upload it. So once you've uploaded your file and completed your order, we then print it on our large scale printer, which lives in the studio above our shop, and we then check the scale for you and we fold it up, and then we can post it out for you, or if you live nearby then you can come and collect it as well. So we print the patterns onto regular paper, which is 90 GSM, which just feels like regular paper really that you would have in your normal printer at home. It's obviously thicker than the really fine tissue paper that you get with some printed patterns, but it's not sort of thickened card-like either. But it's nice and durable, it's sturdy, it's easy to work with, and it will make your pattern last a pretty long time, you know, if you're working with it a lot or pinning through it a lot. And we do also offer a service to print the instructions here too, so that's like a separate product on our website that you can add to your basket, and then you can upload your instruction booklet file in the same way that you did for your A0 file, and then we can print the instruction booklet for you too. Of course, the alternative is that you just view the instruction booklet on your device, your phone maybe, or if you've got a tablet, or if your computer's nearby when you're sewing, you can do that as well. Sometimes the instruction booklets that come with PDF sewing patterns can be quite long, so if you do sort of click print on an instruction booklet at home, just maybe glance over how many pages it is before you do that, because some of them can be pretty long. So now I'm going to talk you through some options of how you can use your pattern, whether you have stuck all of your A4 bits of paper together to get your full size pattern, or you've got your A0 sheets, just some options for what you actually do with that in terms of translating it onto cutting out your fabric, which is obviously the ultimate aim. Now, I would say the most quickest and kind of straightforward way is to just cut straight into that paper the size that you want to make based on the size chart that you've checked in your sewing pattern instructions, and just pin it straight onto your fabric, just like you would with a normal traditional printed sewing pattern. The paper that we print onto for the A0 printing is easy enough just to pin through. Now, if you were working with a very, very fine fabric or a very slippery fabric, then the alternative could be that you put some mats out on the surface that you're working with, you put your fabric down, you put your pattern on top, and then you put some pattern weights down, whether you've got specific pattern weights or you're just using tins of beans from the cupboard, and then you can use a rotary cutter just to cut round it rather than actually pinning through the paper. So that's another, you can either just pin and cut with scissors, or you can weigh it down and cut it with a rotary cutter. So that's probably the quickest way. And then obviously if you wanted to then make a different size in the future, or you wanted to like alter the pattern, or you needed to kind of go back to what the original version of it was, maybe if you had made some alterations and you'd cut straight into it, you can just order another copy to be printed again. The next option, which I do sometimes, is I will trace the pattern. So in the shop we sell dots and cross dressmakers tracing paper, and you can use that by just laying your sewing pattern out on your surface, placing the paper on top, and you will be able to see the lines of the sewing pattern kind of come through, and then you just trace off the size that you want. If you're doing that, just remember to copy over all of the pattern markings and all of the notches, and I would also recommend writing on your traced copy what the piece is, whether it's the sleeve or the bodice, what pattern it is as well, and what size you've traced, because it just makes it easier when you come to use the pattern in the future. You know what you've actually traced off. And then effectively your printed copy, whether it's the A4 ones or the A0 printouts, they sort of stay a bit like a master copy that are still gonna, it's just like the intact original pattern. So that's another option. Obviously it's another step because you've got to trace everything and cut it out, but it works for some people, and it avoids you having to reprint the pattern in the future because you've still got that master copy there. If you're finding it hard to see the lines of the pattern through the dots and cross tracing paper, then the other option is that you can put mats, protective mats down on your surface, and then you can put the dots and cross paper down on top. Then you can put your pattern on top of that so that you can see all the lines really clearly. And then you need to get a toothed tracing wheel, and then you just want to run that wheel over the size that you want to make. And then when you peel it back, you will see a little sort of perforated dotted line in the dots and cross tracing paper. It's quite hard to capture it in the camera, but hopefully when I sort of angle it, you'll see what it is. It's easier to see in real life. And then you could either just use the scissors to cut round that, or if you found it easier, you could just draw over that little dotted line with a pen, and then obviously cut it out from there. Again, just make sure that you write on all of the pattern markings and what the pattern piece actually is if you're doing that method too. Another option is that you can use Swedish tracing paper, which is a little bit more like traditional tissue paper that you would get in a in a traditional pattern, but it's more durable. It doesn't tear as easily, but it is very fine and papery, and as you can see when I lay it out over the A0 printout of a pattern, it is super easy to see all of those lines through. You can actually stitch through Swedish tracing paper as well, so quite often people like it if they want to sort of baste fit the garment or do like a sort of tissue style fit of the pattern as well. It can be useful for that. If you want to check the fit without actually doing like a full-on toile, you can just kind of use the pattern that you've traced for that. And then the other alternative is that you could use the tooth tracing wheel and some carbon paper or like dressmaker's chalk paper to trace over the pattern as well. So in that instance, I would recommend putting down the self-healing mat, the protective mat on your surface again. Then you would put your fabric down on top of that, and then you would get your carbon paper, which does come in quite small sheets. We don't have any large scale sheets available in the shop. It's just these sort of smaller ones, so you'd have to just lay out a couple together and just lay it over where you know you're roughly going to be tracing round. Then put your pattern on top of that, and then just trace round the size that you want to make, again with the tooth tracing wheel. And then when you peel everything back, you will just see this chalk line on the fabric, which you can then just cut round basically. Again, just watch out for your pattern markings there and make sure that you're doing whatever means you need to do to transfer them onto the fabric as well, any notches or buttonholes or dots or anything like that. So finally, I wanted to talk to you about how to actually store and organise your PDF patterns, because I know a lot of people kind of find this a little bit more challenging. They can be quite cumbersome if there's lots of sheets and the paper's a bit thicker. It doesn't kind of fold down neatly like traditional patterns might do. Now, what I found works best for me is that I have these sort of slip-in plastic wallets that I use, which are A4 size, but they're slightly bigger than A4, so you can actually fit quite a lot in them. And I'll always either have printed off the instructions, or I might just print out the first page of the instructions just to slide in at the front of the envelope, just so it's really easy that I can see, I know what pattern is actually in there. It just acts like a nice visual cue that I can instantly know what pattern is in there. Of course, you could just label them if you hadn't printed out your instructions, just write on it what it is. And then I have a cupboard that I keep them in, and I just sort of stack them all up. You could kind of get into a bit more in-depth way of organising them within that. So it might be that you colour code them, maybe like all of your woven patterns are in one colour folder and knit patterns are in another one, or by garment type, like all your tops are in blue folders but all your dresses are in green ones. Whatever works for you, whatever's easiest for you to kind of be able to access the pattern really easily. And then one idea which I think is really great visual aid for sort of being able to kind of browse through what PDF sewing patterns you have in a bit of more of an inspirational way than just looking at folders, plastic folders, or sometimes people use envelopes instead of plastic folders, is if you use Pinterest, you can create a board that is just for your PDF sewing patterns, and you might add images to that board that's of the pattern envelope cover. So if the pattern company have a printed version of the pattern, you could just add that image to your Pinterest board. Or it might be that you've seen someone else's version of a pattern that you really like, that inspired you to get the pattern in the first place, or you thought, yeah, I really want to make a version that's like that. You could add that image to your Pinterest board as well, as a sort of reminder of like, oh yeah, I have that PDF sewing pattern and that was why I got it, because I wanted to make that version of it. So it can just be a much more inspiring visual way to kind of browse through the ones that you've got, because the other alternatives are either you're looking through all your folders, or you're having to just look on your computer at where you filed them, and it's not a very nice visual way to kind of remember what you've got, really. So I hope you have found those hints and tips useful, and that I've maybe convinced some of you to give PDF sewing patterns a go, and that you just sort of now know the options for them and just how to get the most out of them, really. So remember to check out the blog post that goes with this video if you're looking for any of the equipment or tools that I mention in this video. Is all available on our website, and we ship worldwide as well. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, then just remember to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on my next video, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, bye.